All right, so here we are. I'm gonna be planting the two buckwheat plots today, the no-till brassicas into the buckwheat. I got a third spot that I'll be planting today too, but that won't be in this video. That might be in a different video if I take some footage of that. That's just a smaller spot. This right here is that buckwheat rectangle in the 1 acre bean field. The rest of this field's all beans. This area has been tilled for probably 4 to 5 years, ever since we started planting it. We'd usually plow it up and then disc it a bunch. This is the first year we didn't plow it, we just disked it up. The other plot, the other buckwheat plot I'll be planting today, that one's been strictly no-till for about maybe the last 3 years. And there's just a bunch of layers of that rye built up at the bottom. That buckwheat is definitely a little bit shorter. And probably it gets a little bit, that plot gets more shade, but there is some full sun areas, and even in the full sun areas, the buckwheat is shorter. This buckwheat is actually getting nipped on by the deer a little bit on the edge here, which is kind of surprising. Normally they don't really mess with it much, but anyways, this there was a lot of weeds in here. You can see all this lamb's quarters in here. That might be an issue because the buckwheat should crush over and kill really easily, but I'm going to be spraying all these plots after I crush them too. But these lamb's quarters plants, a lot of times, you know, when they get big like this, they're a little bit harder to kill than when they're small. But there'll be some weeds that come back, but hopefully I can get a good kill on mostly everything. You can see this buckwheat's getting stressed because it's, you know, we've had a pretty dry stretch here. We're supposed to get some rain tonight, and a lot of next week is like the lower 80s and upper 70s, not as hot as this week was. And then a few more rain chances, so I figured this would be a good day to get out here and plant some of these no-till plots. So this right here is what I'll be planting. I got some honey hole from Antler King, and I got some Imperial Whitetail wintergreens. Those right there are my two favorite Brassica blends. But the one thing I would like that those ones don't have is some tillage radish. So I got some straight tillage or Dankin radish seed right here that I'm going to mix in. Instead of doing one side wintergreens mixed with that and one side honey hole mixed with that, it's kind of hard to guess the right amount of seed. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of everything. So both these plots, the one I'll be planting now and the other no-till plot, will both be a little bit of all three. I'm going to kind of mix this tillage radish pretty heavy because we got a whole almost an acre of soybeans out there and like plenty of winter food. So I'm not really looking for the turnips and kale. I mean, we'll get some of that, but I want to get a pretty high rate of this tillage radish because, like I say in all my Brassica videos, the tillage radish is the #1 thing the deer eat on in September and October, kind of more geared towards the early season. Once you get to November, December, they switch over to the kale and forage rape, and then once you get to the middle of winter, they start digging up the turnips. So yeah, we'll get this all mixed together and I'll show you what the seed looks like in here. Well, here we are. This is what the seed looks like. You can see all the red ones in there. That's the honey hole seed. All the blue, green, and yellow, that's the wintergreen seed. And then the bigger brown seed is the tillage radish. So got a pretty good mix of everything right in there. This stuff up here is like literally chest high. Where I took the video earlier, that's actually like the shortest stuff in this field. When you get in here, I just finished seeding it. I just want to quick show you this before I crush it down, but there's like honeybees everywhere in here. It's kind of sad to crush this down, but So when you look down at the ground in here, you can see the seed. See right there? That's a wintergreen seed, that's a honey hole seed. Here's another wintergreens and another honey hole. Another seed right there. A couple other seeds right there. I usually seed my no-till plots a little bit thicker than I do if it were a tilled plot. When you till a plot and you kind of pack it in, you get like almost 100% germination. But I've noticed on these no-till plots, I've seeded, you know, definitely thicker than this, and still kind of had issues with a few blank spots here and there. Plus, with this stuff being so high, I was holding the seeder up, so some of the seeds are hitting this and kind of just falling straight down. They're not spreading out. You can see how I walked here, and I like walked like right here. There was a few areas crushed down from the deer in here, but not much. Let's just check this spot right here. See right there, that's a seed. Right there, that's a tillage radish seed. A couple other brassica seeds right here. So I mean, it might be a little bit on the thick side, but I don't think it's going to be an issue because not everything's going to germinate in here, especially if we don't get too much rain. But if we get a little bit of rain, this stuff being green yet, it should hold the moisture for a couple days, even if we do get barely a half an inch. All right, on to plot number 2 now. So down there looks pretty good, but then like right here where I'm standing, this is like by far the worst spot in the whole field. The Brassicas didn't come in last year that good. I tried throwing some rye in here. The rye came in okay, but then when I crushed on the rye, just the water hemp came back in super thick, and the buckwheat didn't really take right here. So I'm literally just seeding into weeds and gonna try and crush them and spray them. Some of these bigger ones like this, they'll snap off at the bottom because this stuff's pretty stocky like buckwheat, and that should kill. But some of these smaller ones, they're probably not gonna kill, and the spray's not gonna kill it either. So there's gonna be some weeds right in here, that's for sure. Well, you can see that this plot did not crush down as good as the other one. Wherever the buckwheat is at its tallest, it crushes down better. Like right here was some of the tallest stuff. Up here, it hardly looks like I went through. It was so short. And over here, it was kind of shorter too, with more weeds. Look at all the weeds in here. And then this right here is the weediest patch. Barely looks like I went through here. And then down there where it's all crushed down, that was probably where the buckwheat was the tallest in this plot. So I think what I'm seriously gonna do is I'm gonna come out here with the disc, and then in some of these spots where there's more weeds and where the buckwheat was shorter, I'm gonna do like one pass or two. Down there where the buckwheat was taller, I probably won't go through that at all with the disc. Same thing with some of the stuff in the middle right here, where everything's crushed down good and where there's no weeds. I'm just gonna leave it all no-till, but some of these areas where the ground literally hasn't been worked up in 3 to 4 years, I mean, we don't have enough moisture coming to really germinate these seeds unless there's a good amount of mulch covering them. So about half this plot, maybe even 3/4 of it, I'm gonna like lightly disc up just to loosen up the soil, and probably have to come back out here with the cultipacker again, but we'll see how it turns out. All right, so back out here now. I just disked it up some areas. You can see I left this middle section right here. I didn't really plan on doing this at the beginning of the day, but after seeing, I kind of remembered from last year that they didn't really crush that good in the short areas, and there's like no material here to really hold moisture. Those really tall sections, like right here is a pretty good taller section. There's all the rye right here, all this big taller buckwheat. That should hold the moisture somewhat. But over here where I dished it up, I mean, literally the seeds are in the ground. And even if we don't get moisture, I mean, these seeds there already is a little moisture in the ground, but these seeds have a way better chance of germinating. And you can see I left that taller section of buckwheat down there. And then right where I'm standing right here, this is where the weeds were super bad. There was literally no buckwheat here at all. So it like needed to get tilled. Otherwise it was gonna be a total failure, because I'm still gonna come back in here and spray this, even though some of these areas I got pretty well worked up already. But there is some weeds in here that are somewhat still alive, and then there's some weeds in this buckwheat here that are still alive that I want to try and kill at least. But I tilled up most of this stuff where it was really short. I think we're gonna get a lot better take with this looser ground here in some of these areas where the buckwheat was almost non-existent. But then over here, I left some of that taller stuff down there by the swamp more. There was some taller stuff there. So there's patches of no-till and patches of till. This is just lightly fluffed up. There's still a lot of mulch and debris on the top, which is good. And right down here, we got a really, really good comparison of the straight up no-till and the chopped up buckwheat tillage, I guess you could call it. Remember, those seeds are down pretty deep in this area. There's nothing on the top, so might have pretty spotty germination on this side as well. If I were to come in here and seed this and then pack it down without any seeding beforehand, it would be like almost perfect. But I already put all the seeds down. I don't want to put any more down to I don't want to end up with a super thick brassica plot, so I'm just gonna go with it. And I'll have lots of good areas in this plot to compare. And here's a sunny spot, over there's a shady spot. Plenty. This is a different type of soil than what there is by that tree. It's drier up there, so this is an experimental plot this year. This is not really a winter holding food plot. I mean, we got all this corn here, so I don't have to worry about, you know, if this doesn't grow that good. This is just an experiment this year, I guess. And I can always come in here and put a bunch of rye in, so we'll see how it goes. All right, so here we are over at the second plot where I tilled up a few spots and left a few spots strictly no-till. This right here is like that area that was almost just solid weeds when I was seeding into it, solid water hemp. Quite a bit of it actually survived the disking, but there is some brassicas coming up. But then like down this way a little bit, the weeds weren't quite as bad. It was just more like, right there is the no-till spot that I left. That was pretty tall buckwheat. And then on the right here, there was some weeds and a good amount of buckwheat. And there really isn't that many weeds coming up. There's a few here and there, a few brassicas here and there. And then look at the no-till section, see what this looks like. I mean, quite a bit of weeds surviving the spraying. Maybe a few less germinating in here. So we'll see how it turns out. It seems like the tilled areas have more new weeds that are just germinating, and this no-till spot has more of these big weeds that survive the crushing and spraying. All this right here. Seems like this no-till section has a little bit higher rate of brassica too, because like I said, some of these areas were solid weeds, and I just came in and disked it up after I'd already seeded. So that's probably why the Brassicas look a little bit thinner on this tilled up area, because I probably put some seeds too deep coming in here with the disc and literally disking in the seed. But it's just a greens plot. I got all this corn here, all that corn. There's some soybeans over there. So it's not like a winter holding plot where I'm trying to maximize my yield on these Brassicas, but they are a little bit thin, a little thinner than I would like them to be, but they're in here. So we'll see how this turns out. I'll have at least 2 more updates, maybe just 1 more. I don't know. We'll see. All right, so back out here. This is the first spot in the video. This was the tilled buckwheat that was like chest high, this whole plot. So looks like certain areas I'm not seeing that much seed. I think I had issues with coverage or broadcasting because it was so tall. In certain areas we got quite a bit of seed. All the little Brassicas, some weeds coming back, these lamb's quarters plants. There's actually quite a few of these lamb's quarters plants that are kind of green yet. This field right here doesn't have a ton of water hemp. That's all water hemp down there in the soybeans. This area, just right here, for some reason doesn't really have much water hemp. It has water hemp when I plant soybeans, but I think there's just more lamb's quarters right here. It's a little bit drier right here than what it is right there. The lamb's quarters, again, is a tough weed to kill, but not quite as tough as water hemp. But you can see here's some of the tillage radishes. We got turnip right here, and then certain areas, you know, are pretty thick with seed. Too thick. So it's kind of hard to tell what we're looking at right now, because I'm looking on the camera and I'm just seeing a bunch of little green. Some of that is like, it's hard to tell how good it's going to turn out. Yeah, because there's Brassicas mixed amongst here, but the weeds are still kind of green. This buckwheat's actually still kind of green too right here. Well, here we are. This is the no-till plot number 1. This is the tilled buckwheat spot. The second plot I'll take you to next is the no-till buckwheat spot. Yeah, it's looking really good. I haven't been out here for a while. I got a really high percentage of this tillage radish in here. Looks like it's almost half and half. Looks like a lot of the kale and forage rape didn't quite come in as good, but I think I might have mixed this tillage radish pretty heavier than I normally do, because, you know, we got all these soybeans right here. That's almost nothing. That's a lot of weeds that grew into those beans right there. But that end of the field is looking really nice over there, those beans. So I got plenty of winter food here. I wanted a high percentage of these tillage radish. I actually have a few kale plants along the edge here that I planted way back in like May. That's just garden kale. They'll eat those up pretty quick, but some weeds coming in. A lot of the lamb's quarters, not much water hemp coming back in. It's just a lot of that lamb's quarters plant, this guy. But overall, you know, I got all the dead stalks here. Overall, it looks pretty weed free. The main thing is just keeping these weeds down, because last year I had beans up here and they were like 6 foot tall weeds in here, kind of like what it is there. And you couldn't even see the deer if they came out when you're hunting in there. So this way, everything's nice and low to the ground. You should be able to get a nice clean shot if something does come out. Got a few buckwheat plants in here that are actually sprouted back up or germinated. Some of the seed must have just not germinated the first round. You can see we got some pretty thick areas and then we got some pretty thin areas. That's because this stuff was so tall. When I was broadcasting it in here, the seed wasn't spreading out correctly because it was just getting held up by all the tall debris. So you can see this is clearly where I walked when I was seeding, and just a few seeds made it over here, a little bit more over here. But that's okay, because in these thin spots, I mean, we got around a month left to a growth. Maybe even you could probably stretch that to a month and a week, maybe a month and 2 weeks, because it's late August now. We usually don't get our first frost till sometime around middle of October, maybe early October would be an early frost. So these Brassicas have over a month to grow yet. So like this thing, and they're to the stage now where they're really growing fast. But these weeds are going to grow for the next month too, but the weeds aren't going to grow that much, because you can see it's like these weeds can sense that the growing season's coming to a close here, because they're already starting to seed out. This is lamb's quarters right here, and it's not going to get much taller than that because it's putting its energy into reproduction and putting on seed heads now. So it's not going to grow much taller than that. But these brassicas, they're going to continue to grow, and they'll get a lot bigger, and these weeds probably won't get that much bigger. So I think this plot will look actually quite a bit better in a month from now, especially in these thin spots where these brassicas are thin and they have plenty of room to grow. But these thick spots, it might be a little bit crowded a month from now when all this stuff gets a little bigger. But overall, it doesn't look too bad. There's pretty good spacing on the brassica. Not too many weeds. Here's a water hemp pigweed. Thankfully, I don't have too much of that in here on this side. That's all water hemp in there and pigweed, all that crap. So I'll take you over to the next plot, which is just that way, a couple 100 yards. Well, here we are. This is that plot where there was a lot of weeds mixed with the buckwheat, and I tilled in certain sections and I left certain sections no till. You can see right here, this is one of the areas I did not till. You can see all this stalk material. A lot of this is buckwheat and some water hemp weeds in here. See these weeds right here? This weed is still alive and is gonna put out some seeds, but it just by crushing it and spraying it a little bit has really set these weeds back. You can see all these little seed heads coming through. Those are the tall weeds that I seeded into that didn't really die with the Roundup. And then all this is just all the buckwheat that I did get a good kill on. And you can see there's still a lot of weeds coming up. So this no-till method works, but in certain areas, I'm still ending up with a lot of weeds in my no-till plots. But right here, it actually does look pretty good for weed control. Not too much, really. And then you can see I got less brassicas over here too. And then here's the tilled section where I actually broadcasted and literally tilled the seed in with the disc, and I still got pretty good germination. Some of these seeds probably got put a little bit deep, but you can see right here, this must have been one of the areas that I left as a no-till. You saw those dead stalky materials right here? And then you look right over to the left here, this is an area that got tilled. So it does seem like the tilling obviously is ending up with more weeds, but I tilled these certain areas in this plot because it was almost solid water hemp, and I was not going to get a good kill on it. I would have got somewhat of a kill, but over here there was a lot less water hemp, and there's still some water hemp in here. On this side of the field, and right up there where I'll take you to next, it was almost solid water hemp, so that's why I tilled it up. Definitely some water hemp coming back, but these brassicas are looking pretty good. A lot of this weed too, this crawling type of weed, whatever that is. That's one of the weeds I don't know, but brassicas are a little bit thin, but like I said, thinner is better than thicker on brassica. Right here is a spot that they look a little bit thick, especially with the weeds coming in too, but the frost will really clean up all these plots. You know, all these weeds will just die as soon as we get a first frost. And like right in here is one of the areas that was almost solid water hemp, and it still is almost solid water hemp. There's a lot of weeds in here. These brassicas don't look as good right here either. And then up here you can kind of see right out in the middle there where stuff is pretty thin. That was the area that I left as no-till. You can see all the old rye and buckwheat thatch. And then along the edge here where there's all these little weeds coming up is I tilled this section right here and left this middle section right here as no-till. So definitely less weeds in here. Next year what I'll probably do is I don't really like seeding the buckwheat into the rye because the buckwheat doesn't do anything. So what I'll probably do is I'll come in here. If I seed rye in this plot, I'll have to kill it early on next spring and then till it all up, put the brassica down, and then no-till plant the whole field into brassica. Because it seems like, you know, this no-till planting is obviously working. There's less weeds. The brassicas over here, they germinated just as good. I mean, the no-till side didn't quite germinate as good as the tilled side, but the tilled side has a lot more weeds in here, which I don't want. So it looks like on these no-till sections, I'm gonna have to seed a little bit heavier, but not super heavy. And next year, I'm definitely gonna probably just no-till these brassicas, but I'm gonna till in the buckwheat to get a good buckwheat crop. And it should probably bring up more weeds too, but I do get a somewhat of a kill on these weeds when I crush them down and spray them. But if I can get a good solid stand of buckwheat in here by tilling, then I can just no-till plant the brassicas and then end up with a few less weeds, because I don't want to till plant the brassicas. I'll till plant the buckwheat because I'm going to crush the buckwheat and weeds down eventually anyways, but I want to no-till plant the brassica so, you know, I can get a kind of a weed-free stand of brassica like what there is right here. Just maybe a little bit thicker would be nicer. And then right here is a spot that I tilled, and you got a little more weeds in here. This might have been some no-till right in here too. Some of this thatch, it didn't really work in the best when I tilled it, but you can see over here, I think this was all tilled kind of, but the thatch didn't really work in. That's why there's a lot of thatch on the ground. So I'm probably going to seed some of this into rye, but I'm going to have to kill it early on next year. And then right out here, I know for sure this is no-till. I didn't till through here, and you can see the difference. I mean, very few weeds. And then right here where it was tilled, look at the weeds, you know, it's a lot of green in there. So these brassicas are a little thin, but they got another month to grow to fill in the gaps. I mean, there might be some weeds starting to germinate on top here, but not much of anything really. This is looking pretty nice. We'll take a quick look over here on this side. Some of this over here I think was tilled a little bit. I think I rounded this corner, but then left. I can't really remember what I did anymore, but this must have been tilled right here a little bit. I don't know, I'm not sure anymore, but this is pretty shady over here. These brassicas usually grow, but not as good as the stuff out there, obviously, but yeah, it's looking pretty good. I already told you my plans for next year. So the no-till definitely seems to be doing better on the weed control, obviously, except when you till, you get, you know, better germination of brassica, but you obviously get more weeds too. You get better germination on the weeds as well. So I really like how that other plot turned out, the one I was just at before here. So I think, like I said, next year I'm going to till up this whole plot in the spring, throw my buckwheat down, and then come sometime in July, middle of July, I'll seed my brassica and crush it all down. If there's a good amount of weeds, it should still work. Like the other plot had pretty big weeds in there, and it's still, you know, it looks probably actually a little better than this plot does. This plot is a little bit more patchy because I have so much rye material in here. I can't let this rye get to 6 feet tall because the material just becomes too thick for the brassicas to get good germination then. Even the buckwheat had hard time germinating in all this freaking rye. So if I do seed rye in here, it's getting sprayed early on. So that's the plan. Hope you enjoyed the video. I got more brassica videos coming. And yeah, see you in those videos, I guess.